Welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. Scott Linden here. Hope you're having a great season so far. Mine, stellar. Yeah, it's one of those years. If it's not for you, come on out west. Seeing a lot of birds in interesting places. Chukar where quail should be, quail where chukar should be. I'll give you a report on the Huns down the road a little bit. Anyway, we got a great show in store for you today. Tim Linehan joins me, a professional forest grouse guide in Montana, of all places. So looking forward to learning a lot about that aspect of our world. He's Orvis-endorsed, also a fly fishing and a big game guide, so we'll work on the crossovers and the benefits there as well. Whether it's habitat, dog handling, or shooting, Tim has got some advice for us. And then a couple comments from you all on worst case scenarios and what we might do so we don't have to worry about them quite as much. And in our Handle It segment, Neil Higgins from Minnesota asks a question that I will answer about steadiness on a young dog and whether there are some things he needs to do or whether he should put up with what he's got. It's all coming up on the Upland Nation podcast, made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, and Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food. Yeah, a rain out here and there, but still getting out fairly frequently. My goal this year is to increase the number of days in the field versus last year, which was a kind of slow year for a bunch of reasons. So we're having a few setbacks once in a while, but getting out fairly often here. Still putting more miles on the electric motorcycle with flick alongside just to maintain that chukar hunting condition. Working for us. Working for you? Well, a few different things. Got some real interesting correspondence over the last few weeks. Interesting how the character of your questions and your advice changes once we're into the bird season. Joe Rundell suggested something after I talked about some of the worst nightmares on social media and then cited a few here. Joe has a great suggestion. If you have a dog vest and you use it, one of the worst problems we face is losing a dog. Well, one smart idea would be to take a good Sharpie pen and put your name and phone number on the dog's vest so it's highly visible. Heck, somebody doesn't even have to catch a dog to call you and say where that dog is. That's a great one, Joe. Thanks a lot for that. Yet one more way to find a lost dog. And then David Klopp relates an experience I hope nobody else has to go through. Looking for grouse. His dog got 600 yards downhill and then, boop, just stopped. He only knew that, thank goodness, because I had suggested that everybody probably ought to invest in a GPS collar. That's how we found him. Unresponsive, lying down, heat exhaustion. So, David watered him down and carried him out 3/4 of a mile to the car. Wow, good on you and your dog, I'm sure. GPS collar, cheap insurance policy and well worth it. Yeah, otherwise, David says his dog would not have made it. And here's the kicker. It was only 60 degrees outside on the north side of the hill. So, heat exhaustion, heat-related illness of one sort or another can take a dog no matter what time of year and what the conditions are. Not just early season, anytime. Thanks so much for that story, David. Glad you both came out of it okay. And just a quick reminder, we are brought to you in part by PointerShotguns.com. So excited about a new project we'll be doing. Remember Fur Feathers, friends? Yeah, it's coming back in 2025, and pointershotguns.com will be the premier sponsor. Lots more to share with you as that comes together. Thank you, Pointer Shotguns, for being a part of that effort, and you'll learn more in the months to come. Right now, though, what you should learn about is the new shipment of sub-gauge shotguns they got in. Yeah, your dealers are getting shipments from Pointer Shotguns every week, all year. These guys fly them in. There's always new stock at your Pointer dealer. Go to pointershotguns.com, find a dealer near you, shop around, find the one you love, and make it your new gun. pointershotguns.com. And then stock up on ammo, shooting, hunting, and outdoor gear at MidwayUSA.com. I told you about the tour I took. Unbelievable distribution center. And the good news is, if you place your order before 3 p.m., that order goes out onto the truck that day. They're constantly adding more dog and bird hunting gear. They've got just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors. Sign up for the emails or texts and get 10% off your next order at MidwayUSA.com. Well, I love talking with this guy for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I never get to talk forest grouse at least not as often as I'd like to. And also, Tim Linehan could read the phone book with this what would I call it? Northeast accent. Tim Linehan of Linehan Outfitters. Right. Welcome to the program.
Thanks again, Scott. It's good to hear from you again. Thank you.
You know, someday I'm going to do an entire podcast of people with accents that are from the maybe from the wrong place, because yours is from where?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
New England.
Yeah. Hello, Pelham, by the way. And Dave and Janice, my good friends over there.
Right.
But you aren't there.
Nope. Haven't been there for a long time. My family, my entire immediate family is still in the town we grew up in, basically. I mean, a couple towns over. But my folks have only lived in 3 places, and they're still well, Scott, and they're all in New Linden, New Hampshire, Lake Sunapee, New Hampshire. Yeah.
So now I know how to say Lake Sunapee, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And this is a little sidebar, but they're now extinct, but it was a complete subspecies, and it's on all the old taxonomical records, but there was a Sunapee trout from native to Lake Sunapee in New Hampshire. Long gone, even when I was a kid, yeah. They introduced lake trout, and lake trout pretty much just kind of changed the whole system, but I think through the early '60s there was still native Sunapee trout. But
I'll be darned.
Anyway,
well, and as a fishing guide in the fishing season too, you're probably a little bit closer to that than some. Definitely. But for our purposes, you're a bird hunting guide, and you're
absolutely, and it's that time of year.
Yeah, it is. I'm as I've related earlier in the podcast. You're in Yak, Montana, and when somebody thinks forest grouse, that's probably not what they think about. Tell me a little bit about your operation.
Yeah, so we're way up in the far northwest corner of Montana, and you're right. People mention upland hunting in Montana, and obviously, I think the first thing that comes to mind would certainly be pheasant, and then sharptails and huns, and all that stuff is east of the mountains, east of the Rocky Mountain front. And I'm way up in the far northwest corner. As I sit and talk to you right now, my home, our lodge, is about 5 miles from the British Columbia border, and this is, timber, heavily timbered logging country, and as you well know, logging country favors in particular ruffed grouse, and in this case we also have blue grouse and spruce grouse. So forest grouse being a little bit different from the prairie birds, quite a lot different from the prairie birds.
Yeah, I was going to say you're being modest. They're markedly different in so many ways, from behavior to habitat, and we're going to get into all of that. I promise you, everybody. But let's start with that. You talk about habitat, and if you're a grouse hunter, you think you know what good habitat is, and then you mentioned logging, and to a lot of people, as my friends at the Rough Grouse Society would say, young forests need love too. you get a young forest by cutting down older trees. Tell me about your hunting grounds.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You know, I have dyed-in-the-wool grouse hunters come from all over the country, Scott, and it is interesting because if you hunt grouse, I'm generally speaking ruffed, although spruce grouse will mix and be in the same habitat. Duskies used to be called blues. We'll get to in a minute, but you know they love 20 to 40-year-old, 20 to 50-year-old logged areas, and when I get someone that comes from Ohio or New Hampshire or Maine, or someone who knows forest grouse, ruffed grouse in particular, they'll walk into a cover and they'll be like, I'll hear them say to themselves, "Ooh, this looks good." And the thing about grouse habitat, forest grouse habitat, it has to be a mixture of age classes, and so you do need some, to your point, some older conifers in the cover. But then there's also this another element that's critically important: a run of alder. Maybe a spring seep, a habitat change where think edges. That's really kind of critical when we're talking about forest grouse. And by edges, I mean edges can sound kind of vague, but if you have a logged area, there'll be an edge where it was logged and then the edge where it wasn't logged. And that's the kind of stuff that those edges and those little, pockets of open areas, even though it may be growing back after 20 or 30 years, really define forest grouse habitat. Edges, open pockets where they can move around and feed, but enough cover from older growth in the area close by, maybe 300 or 400 or 500 yards. You know what I mean? But still, that mix of habitat with some youngness thrown in as well is perfect, or is very, very good, forest grouse habitat.
Well, the words that come to mind are escape cover. You can have great feeding cover, and in some parts of the year you want sunshine, and all of that is wonderful. But, when a bad guy comes through, you're a grouse, you want to go somewhere thick.
Right, yeah. So, the bad guys up here, too. The bad guys up here, there's a lot of, we should be careful. They're not bad, but they're just making a living, too. But a lot of, pine martens and squirrels and, coyotes and ground-based. But up here, I would say that avian predators are probably just as hard on grouse and little grouse. We have extraordinary populations of owls up here, and in various sizes, and smaller hawks and things like that. And people sort of forget that, prairie birds it's almost exclusive. Well, no, it would be a majority of avian predators to worry about. But here it's 50-50. You know what I mean? We have a lot of avian predators, but they also have. But there's so much habitat, Scott. It's kind of unbelievable, really. You know what I mean? That's the other thing about this area up here. It's just loaded with that. Everywhere you go is great habitat.
Yeah, and we're talking what elevations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So these are some of the lowest river bottoms in the state of Montana, this far northwest corner.
Yeah.
And so as I sit right here at my lodge, just to give you some reference, it's 3,500 feet. And then even when we're chasing duskies, and as you well know, you have to go up a little higher in elevation for duskies. But in my area, we're only going up to about 5,500, 6,000 feet for duskies. So it's not really, I think about people that talk about duskies in Colorado. They're up 11,000 feet. 10,000 feet.
Yeah. Up there with the ptarmigan.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
exactly.
I want to ask you a little bit about the habitat differences. You know that New England habitat, and you mentioned alders. But in the West, generally speaking, where you're hunting, if we're hunting ruffed grouse, we're looking for seeps, we're looking for edges, we're looking for some alders. What else makes for good habitat for ruffed grouse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ground forage in the is critical, and in this case, specifically one of the most important food bases for grouse, for spruce and ruffed in particular, and duskies will get on them too. But kinnikinick berries,
Oh,
So I know kinnikinick berries are also found up in the Midwest. I know people talk about them they call them bearberries up in Wisconsin.
okay.
And some version of a low brush. Now we have, a variety of low brushes. You know what I mean? You don't want, so kinnikinick berries, snowberries, which also provide for a low brush and a food base. But you're looking for alders. You're looking for good escape cover in the form of maybe some older growth right nearby, right, that sort of a thing, Scott. But
yeah.
one of the things that's also important is that sort of brushy aspect throughout the entire cover, excepting those little open pockets as big as your living room or as big as your yard, or you know what I mean, those edges that we're talking about. So we have a variety of native brush. And besides the alder, you know what I mean? Alder's kind of different because alder, as you well know, will often be in clumps and rows and kind of like aspens. You know what I mean? They kind of tend to be in a specific area, and that's how they grow. And then additionally, I'm talking about, to your point, what else makes for good cover, and that would be sort of knee-high brush in the form of either edible vegetation, snowberries, or we have just lots of other native brushes that are perfect for that habitat as well.
Well, so at any given time during the day, they'll be in that more frequently than most places. Is it because they can feed? Is it because it's protection from avian predators, or is it all of the above, the full meal deal?
Yeah, all the above. Very good. Right. Yes, and yes. Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and then the alder's kind of critical too, because as you well know, alder usually implies some sort of a little bit more moist. It might not necessarily be a spring seep with water, but it's going to be a cool pocket. And let's just say early in the season in September, we can get 70-degree days in the afternoons. I go straight to the alder swamps and the alder breaks and things like that. And by golly, that's where they are, because it is simply cooler. That's all there is to it. They may be up feeding on the hillside 150 yards from the alder, but they're going to drop right in there at 10:30, 11 o'clock. In the midday cover, I'm going to run for alder.
Wow, I had never given that any thought. I just finished a story for Gundog Magazine on the other end of the calendar where birds go to warm up.
Yeah, absolutely. Higher and drier, right? Higher and drier. Yeah, they're starting to get that way right now over here in my country.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you never think about birds having to cool off.
Right.
That's seldom an issue, but I ruffies in particular are over these boys. I don't know. I've been chasing them for a long time now, and I'm often surprised at how cool they want to be. You know what I mean? Particularly earlier in the season. Let me be clear about that. Yeah, early in the season. But yeah, to your point, literally, I'm hunting them now on more open hillsides, and so while they may be tougher to get close to and really tough for a dog, they are looking for higher and drier areas right now, and that often means, in my country anyway, that they may be in a little bit more open stuff. Yeah.
But try getting close to a big drummer, a big ruffed grouse, even with a good bird dog in open country. You might as well go buy a lottery ticket. Yeah.
Hey, that's Tim Linehan, Linehan Outfitters. If you want to learn more about his entire operation, go to fishmontana.com. but I'll tell you, when you open that page, if you're a trout angler, it's pretty cool. But learn more about all he's doing over there. He's an Orvis-endorsed guide, has been for, like when they invented Orvis. Not really, but quite a while. Probably since day one or close to it when you open up your
pretty
lodge.
close. Yeah.
I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. Yeah, forest grouse. I really got to work on that, and that's my ulterior motive here, because my country in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon and Washington is very similar to where you are. Now, you're describing to a great degree, you're talking about river bottoms that, for example, are even lower in elevation than where I'm standing right now. Yeah,
super interesting. The lowest point in Montana, actually, Scott, is literally, about 30, 40 miles from where I am, and it's where the Kootenai River hits the border of Idaho, and it's 1,800 feet in elevation.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting country. Now it's also spectacular because we're in the spine of the Rockies, and we're going to go up right off the river bottom to 4,500, 5,500, 6,000 feet. So it's spectacularly beautiful country. But you're right. It's oftentimes my hunters, my guests, are surprised at how low the elevation is when they're hunting here. Yeah.
Well, I bet they're grateful for that in some ways. I know when I'm hunting the high country, whether it's chukars or anything else, you can feel the lack of oxygen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a typical hunt with Linehan Outfitters. I show up from anywhere. You come get me. We go to Yak. And by the way, Yak with two A's. Maybe I should
Correct.
say Yak.
Yeah.
Then you pick me up or somebody picks me up the next morning.
Yeah.
Describe a typical hunt.
Yeah, so we'll roll out. We usually get a good start. We like to hunt hard. We like to hunt the old-fashioned way. Pick you up, just as light's coming up, Scott. Have a good cup of coffee, and then the nice thing about where we are is we don't have to go very far at all. I mean, I have a huge concession. My goodness, I have no idea how many acres, but suffice it to say, I haven't been to half of my concession in 30 years. But
wow.
So we don't have to travel very far. We might go 15 minutes, we might go 20 minutes, but we're basically hunting right here around, in the local woods, even though, we may be 10 miles up the road.
Yeah.
And then we'll put the dogs down. This is logging country, as we mentioned, and the nice thing about that is we are accessing, so there's miles and miles of old logging roads, 2 tracks, they would call them where I grew up in New Hampshire. And the nice thing is that they're gated to non-motorized traffic. So, or to motorized traffic, I should say.
Yeah.
So, all the non-motorized access that you want, but they're gated, and so you can't. There are no trucks, no 4-wheelers, and so it's all foot traffic. And we access the covers, we access the country, the habitat, so to speak, through on these old 2 tracks. And put the dogs down at first, right on the first hunt, and then might hit 2 or 3 covers in the morning, Scott, come back sometimes, or tailgate it, some version of that, and then, 2 or 3 or 4 covers, depending on the size of each cover in the afternoon. Typically, the thing about hunting forest grouse, it's a little different from the prairie, as I'm sure you know. It isn't like you park the truck and head into the wind for 2 miles. You know what I mean? It's a little bit more concise, I guess might be the word. So we're hunting very specific areas, that habitat that you and I talked about 3.5 minutes ago. And I would say my average cover, an hour, maybe a little bit more, depending on the size of the cover. And we'll hit, as I said, 2 or 3 in the morning, 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and make a big day of it, and get back to the lodge sometime, dinner time-ish. Yeah.
With me, it would be happy hour time, but that's another story.
Yeah, exactly. That's more what I was referencing. Yeah.
So you drop the tailgate. Everybody's ready to roll. You put the dogs on the ground. Do you have a strategy from there? Besides, who's walking where? What are the dogs doing?
Yeah. That's a great. I'd love to talk about this. That's a great question. The obviously, stating the obvious, but you can stating the obvious because it's so important to state the obvious. Safety first. And the one thing about hunting in this kind of cover also, as you well know, this is thick stuff. And everybody's got orange hats and vests, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes, it's thick enough so that you really kind of can't see the other guy, even though you might only be 20 or 30 yards apart. So typically what we'll do is, I would say, depending on the size of the cover, I might go all the way to the inside of the cover, and we'll spread out about 20 or 30 yards apart. Dogs will cast between us, Scott, and if you think of it this way, we'll go down what would be sort of, well, if I go all the way to the inside of the cover, that's the farthest side, the farthest edge that I'm going to hunt, right? So we'll make a pass down that side, make a wagon wheel, that is the guy on the outside of the run, swings all the way out and around, and then we make a pass back through the other half of the cover, staying 20 or 30 yards apart, and also in this kind of cover, I once had a guy say, Tim, you're like the infielder on a baseball diamond, always chatting, always making sure everybody knows where the other guy is, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, so we're just constant vocalization. You okay over there, Joe? Yep. And staying in a line, holding the line is critically important.
Yeah.
That is staying in a straight line so that someone doesn't get in front of the guns or behind the gun, or, too far behind the guns.
Yeah. Yeah. How about the dogs? How are they working when you're doing this?
Yeah. So I've got setters. People bring their own dogs. I had a guy brought a wonderful lab that stayed really close, a Flushing dog, and he did well. Had a poodle pointer this year from another client. The dogs typically stay a lot closer than they would on the prairie. So one of the things that's also kind of critical. Any good dog is going to figure it out. You know what I mean? But you don't necessarily, only because it takes a long time to get there. You don't want a dog to be out there 100 yards. I would say the range on my dogs is more like 50 and sometimes under, depending on the cover.
Yeah.
I have GPS on them, Scott, but what I really like is I do run beepers because sometimes you can't see them. GPS is great and you can generally walk to the dog, but it's so nice to have a beeper because I can just tell Joe on the outside, hey Joe, it's all you. She's over by you. Just go to that beeper.
Yeah.
And that works out really, really well. But to your point, a lot closer, generally significantly closer working dogs when you're hunting forest grouse. Ruffies in particular are very difficult for a dog, even a great dog. They tend to wiggle. They won't run like a rooster.
Yeah.
But they do wiggle out. If you get a smart old roughy and wiggles out there 30 yards, and they are amazing at evading a dog. Just amazing. Sometimes even after all these years, Scott, I'm like, that thing just ghosted us. It's unbelievable. I've got a really seasoned dog, and here we are. We just got ghosted by a roughy. No surprise. But that's because it's so thick. And so a working, dog that's going to work a little bit closer is way better, critical, to be honest. You know what I mean? You don't want them out there too far. They may hold the point, but that roughie in particular is just going to walk away. Well, that's how that'll go.
It's funny. I draw an analogy with some of the chuckers I chase. If they're at the top of the ridge line and I'm in the bottom of a creek, the dog goes on point up there. He's done his job, but it takes me 20 minutes to get up there. It's not the dog's fault.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And everybody who's hunted me has seen that happen. But hey, I got a doctor's note this year, so it's okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's true. You can have a nice solid dog and it's out there on point for 3.5 minutes, and you get there and you got ghosted, and that roughie. Sprucers will hold really tight. They're great for a dog. They'll sit right there. Duskies, as you know, probably somewhere in between roughies and spruce, right? They can sometimes hold and sometimes they're jumpy. I don't know. They're funny like that. But roughies in particular, I often tell people, you can't get there in 2 minutes. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It ain't going to last much longer than that. Yeah.
I get it. And that is probably the best argument for getting a dog, for hoping, I think, your dog will work close in tight cover.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll make a comment. I often, guys and gals guests are often worried how their dog's going to perform. Geez, Tim, he's never hunted like this. She's never hunted like this. And it's always really fun to watch a dog figure it out. And most dogs figure it out, Scott. You know what I mean? They generally figure it out. Once in a while you get one that just is a big runner, and that's its nature. But by and large, it's interesting to me. It's fun to see. They know way more than we do. Trust your dog. They know way more than we do. And I've seen big running dogs. All of a sudden, they're just staying closer. They get it, particularly especially after somebody knocks one down. Then they get it.
There you go.
Then they understand that, okay, I've got to be in here a little bit closer. This is the deal. Not all of them, but I would say that the majority of dogs do figure it out, and that's really fun for a dog handler. It's really fun for an owner to.
Well, you can relate to this, and anybody with a young dog can also get it. I was hunting with my good friend Dave opening weekend with his 7-month-old Brittany, who'd never seen a chucker before in his life. And for the first hour, he followed Flick, my wire hair. He just said, "Whoa, this looks good. Yeah, I'm just going to go running around with that guy." It's like a dog park with sagebrush.
Right.
And then, as you described, he sees the first bird and kind of the light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now I have purpose. I understand what we're doing here. And you're describing the polar opposite of that. Instead of this guy, this young dog Prez running big to find birds, you're talking about dogs who figure out, well, I got to run small to find birds.
Yeah.
You talked about something. I was going to ask you about bells. And it may be academic because beeper is just an electronic bell you can turn on and off.
Right.
Obviously, you don't think it's scaring birds away to have noise coming from the dog's collar.
Nah. Nope, not up here where I am. The habitat is so vast, Scott.
Yeah.
That I don't necessarily worry about that. I generally don't hunt the same cover more than once during the season. I might if there's a big bunch of birds. You know what I mean? I might.
Yeah,
but,
I do.
I'm like, as are you. You only need one or two from a bunch, and then you move on to the next bunch. You don't want to shoot 5 birds out of a 6 or 7 bird, bunch. And so, but I have never found that. I often have guys ask me that. Now back in New Hampshire and maybe in parts of Vermont and places like that where ruffed grouse are probably getting a little bit more pressure, yeah, maybe they would get jumpy with that sort of a thing. But I have never worried about that spooking bird, never worried about bells or noise spooking birds, and also we do have coyotes and lions and wolves, and I want to be making a little bit of noise because there are things that would eat my dogs and possibly even eat me. I'm sort of exaggerating, you know what I mean? But we do live in an area where there are lots of big predators. Yeah,
and good point. Hadn't given that much thought because we're just learning to cope with wolves right here. But you guys have had them for a while, and like you said, on top of that, mountain lions and even a pissed off pine marten might take a chunk out of your foot.
Yeah, right. It's right.
So you're at the conclusion of your grouse season because pretty soon you're going to be 8 feet in snow. But what was the highlight? Describe a hunt or a hunting scenario that really kind of reminded you of why you do this.
Well, I first of all, I still love it. It's most of my adult life. I'm 33 years in business, 32 years in business, something like that, Scott. But I still do it. Was that the question? Why I still love it? Why? Yeah. I still do it because I think it's still every day I go every day I load up the dogs and drive away, and then when I put the dogs down, there's still a part of it where it's like the first time for me. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's still new, it's still fresh, it's still different, especially when you get a new dog. It's still exciting. It still gives me great joy. And maybe, I kind of feel like I'm stating the obvious because otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But I still have tremendous enthusiasm and tremendous passion for it. I think in my case too, I have that perfect schedule whereby I do about 120 odd fishing days, and then right about the time I'm getting a little tired, mostly from just kind of repetition. You know what I mean? It's still,
I'm nodding my head. If you couldn't tell.
Yeah, once I shove off, I'm perfectly happy in the drift boat, right? But after 120 or 130 days, you're just kind of ready for something different and ready to be in the woods. Yeah. And so then, so I transition about the middle of September into the bird hunting, and it's just new. It's just different. Every year it just seems like, okay, it's the start of a new season. It's the start of maybe a new dog. It's the start of new covers. Always wonderful to, speaking of dogs, Scott, we have a raven that drives my 5-year-old nuts. Just crazy.
I bet
it
because
flies by the window.
He probably imitates all sorts of other animals too.
Yeah, exactly.
Our ravens are ventriloquists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it flies by the window, whoosh, 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 and I don't know what, but they just like to chase it in the yard. So.
Love it.
But it's kind of. I'm sure you feel the same way. It's I think that I don't know that I'd ever get tired of chasing grouse. I just don't. There are days when I might get tired of fishing, but for a different reason, maybe just fatigue, general fatigue. But there's something about stomping in the woods, and there's something that's so satisfying about seeing a bird fall over a point, or someone making a good shot, or that's just a very satisfying thing. Because let's face it, forest grouse not about numbers. It is not about numbers. You get a couple, 3 good shots for the day, and that's a big day in my country anyway. Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget. I was at the Rough Grouse Society annual, whatever they call it, the National Hunt.
Yeah.
One year, and when you talk to enough of those guys, you realize they get as much thrill out of hearing a flush in the distance as they do about shooting a flush bird.
Right. Yeah.
Hell, their lanyard has 2 counters, one for flushes and one for birds. They shoot.
Exactly.
I get it. So
exactly. Right. Yeah.
You mentioned.
I often tell people. Go ahead.
After you.
I often tell my guests, so long as it's safe. And I have to be careful because I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. But I often tell them, with ruffies in particular, even sprucers, any sort of forest grouse, shoot the shadow.
Yeah.
Because you're not ever going to see a bird like you do in open country. You know what I mean? You may get one shot all day that, wow, I saw that whole roughie flying away. But more often than not, I will sort of tell people, generally speaking, Scott, don't be afraid to shoot the shadow, because that's basically what it's going to look like by the time you get your gun.
I'm glad you brought that up. I will talk more about that. I'm looking at the mounted alder branch, the trophy from my last grouse hunt up there. But we'll talk about that, among other things, in the second half of the Upland Nation podcast. That's Tim Linehan. If you want to learn more, fishmontana.com. I know, but there's some great stuff there. And you'll learn more about Tim and his lovely bride as well, who are running the lodge up there at Yak, Montana. I'm Scott Linden. This is the Upland Nation podcast. We'll be back to Tim in just a moment. And then also down the road, we have Neil Higgins' question about steadiness. So stick around for all of that. Tim, you'll be right back. Right now, let's have a word from HiVizSights.com. I'll be interested to see how they perform in the grouse woods if I ever get there again. But the whole idea behind HiViz sights is this interlocking light pipe system that allows your head, your subconscious, to pick up the muzzle, the bead, if you will, while your eyes are looking at the moving target. And there must be a relationship there. If you want to learn more about how that works, go watch my video at HiVizSights.com, HiViz sights.com. And take care of your gun, especially if you've been shooting too many alders, with Sage and Breaker gun cleaning and care products. sageandbreaker.com, crafted at the highest caliber. They make gun cleaning products and accessories for hunters and gun enthusiasts. Whether you're a shooter, rifle hunter, or a shotgunner, they've got something for you. Watch the videos. You'll learn something about taking care of your own shotgun. It's all at sageandbreaker.com. And welcome back, Tim Linehan, to the Upland Nation podcast. Yak, Montana, one of those places. Back in the day, I remember a football coach saying, I never lived there. In the USA Today weather map, it's always dark blue up there.
Right, yeah.
How cold is it going to get this winter?
Well, it's interestingly enough, we can get cold. We can usually get a cold blast sometime, Scott, between, January and middle January, 1st of February. If that cold, that bubble of cold air comes out of the Gulf of Alaska and spills over the west side of the divide, last year we topped out at 40 below zero. But I would say sometimes it's way more mild than people think. We're on the west side of the Continental Divide, and so if that bubble of cold air doesn't spill over the west side, we can often Well, we will be 20s for a lot of the early mornings, and maybe a little cooler than that. But we can have days in the 20s and even days in the 30s, and some years it's maybe particularly mild compared to what people might imagine. We're 8 hours from Seattle. That's where the weather comes from, and so some years it's not as bad as you might think. Well, other years, last year was brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be worse. You could be 4 hours from Seattle.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Then right. people from there might come over once in a while.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I want to. You touched on something that I really made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when we're talking about why why you love grouse hunting so much, and you talked about birds and dogs and all the wonderful things. And I wrote down, because someday I'll write a magazine story about it. I wrote down the word newness, and you mentioned there's always something out there that's kind of a pleasant surprise. Let's talk about that for a moment. You talk about a young dog, and I described Dave's young Brittany, and you've probably got a young dog every few years too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What is it about those dogs, the ones where the light bulb is just starting to flicker? What do you love most about that whole idea of what they're doing, what they're picking up, what you think they're thinking, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I think first of all, it's so fun because you're doing it together. Maybe that's what makes it. At least in my case, I think that's what's so fun. No, I'm certain that's probably true with all of us. Anybody that has a dog, you're doing it together, Scott. And the amazing thing is, sure you get a dog from a good breeder and a good line, and they're bred with instinct, and that's going to take over at some point. But what is most fun to me is watching a young dog, in this case, talking specifically about young dogs, start to hunt with confidence and to notice the difference in almost literally, day by day. And as an example, I've got a 1.5-year-old setter, and she's lovely. She ran. I put all my dogs down young. I put them down at 6 or 7 months, and I let them run around with the other dogs, and they're going to bump birds. And so long as guests don't mind that, it's a good way to get them started. But at a 1.5, some people would say setters that's still kind of young. But in this case, I started to watch her hunt with confidence. I mean, you run a bird dog every single day. She had hundreds of contacts with wild birds this season, Scott. You watch them put it together on a day-by-day basis. As an example, she started to reposition about halfway through the season in order to pin a roughie. And seeing that alone just made me smile, because prior to that, she'd sneak, stop, sneak, stop, sneak, stop. But that bird was still moving out in front of her. Okay. About halfway through the season, and I'm pretty certain it's because she was hunting with my 5-year-old, right? You have to assume that. She repositioned nicely. But she was hunting alone. She finally broke. At first I wanted to holler, no, whoa. You know what I mean, right? That was I thought, let's just maybe I should just let her go. She ran up about 50 yards, started sneaking back, and boom, hard stop, locked up on that bird. And so that's the sort of thing, the newness that we were talking about. That's the new, that's the newness of each day. Those are the things that are wonderful and extraordinary. And outside of dog work, the newness of a new cover. I mean, this year I hunted a place, been here 30 years. I think I've probably thought about it, Scott. I think I'd probably been there 2 or 3 times. It's kind of back behind the gate, 2 or 3 miles, so you got to go a little farther. But I probably found it whitetail hunting and made a little note at some point, and finally got in there this year, and sure as the dickens, a bunch of birds in there. So, I think those experiences, while they may generally be, under the umbrella of the everyday experience, there's something new every day that sort of makes your eyes pop and like, wow. And so some of it too is just affirmation. Like, yes, I knew there would be birds here.
That's your line. It's never my line.
Well, not always. I should say that. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. For 5 years running, my goal was never to hunt the same cover twice, and I pretty much did that. And some of the time, the only reason you do it is so you can cross that place off your list. Done
Right.
with it. Never need to go back there ever.
Yeah.
And then others stay on the list. You mark them on the map, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get back to a strategy that you use. I wonder why we would put the dogs on the ground and walk as far into the cover as possible before we even start hunting. I know we might shoot something on the way, but what's the point of starting way over there? Is it so that when we're done, we're right there at the truck again?
Yeah, basically, right. So you had asked about much more from a practical point of view.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that idea. I always go uphill to start so that it's always downhill on the way back.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And sometimes too, it's hard to hunt the wind up in my country, Scott, because sometimes the covers are such that you're just not going to hunt into the wind. You know what I mean? It's just, you can go all the way around it, but half the time, the dogs are, the dogs will learn to go out and hunt back. And I have to remind people, no, she's not running too far. She's going to come right back at us. But that said, I think that, the logistics of putting a forest grouse hunt together often depend, to your point, on, where the truck is. It's always nice to end up right at the truck, or sometimes I am trying to navigate the wind, even if you tack a little bit, to try and keep it, crosswind or something like that. But So to answer the question specifically, I'll go all the way in sometimes more from a pragmatic point of view, really.
Yeah, I did, and I'll bring it up because he's a colleague of yours on the east side, Pig Eye Outfitters. Pete, he told me years ago that prairie hunts, he goes in a big circle. Same logic. We end up back at the truck. But also the rationale is, so the wind will probably be in your favor 3 of the 4 directions.
Yeah, right. Good for him. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So if there is one and you can use it in the grouse woods, I would imagine it would do the same thing. Before I forget, let's talk a little bit about those other grouse, just because, and you can call them, pardon me, whatever names you want. We don't need to be politically correct about what the American Ornithological Union has called them. We know them as sooties or blues or spruce or whatever. How does hunting for them differ than the rough grouse? Many of us might know a little bit better.
Yeah, so spruce and ruffed are, generally the same size, and sprucers are just, they'll mix. I mean, you can be going through, what would be typically a ruffed cover and or a spruce cover, in any cover that, let me put it this way, duskies need a little more, blues need a little more elevation, or they like elevation, Scott. So typically when I'm hunting down a little lower, you could run into a bunch of sprucers, and 100 yards later you could run into a bunch of ruffies in the same cover. And oftentimes they'll be sitting side by each. Sometimes I'll run into spruce grouse and 2 ruffies will get up, they're sitting with them. Duskies on the other hand, blue grouse on the other hand, are going to want to be up at elevation. And in my country, that means, 4.5, 5,000, 6,000 feet. So the first thing we do is, you'll literally just hike up the side of a mountain, up the side of a ridge, or take an old logging road and walk it up to the top, and then climb up to the top of the parky areas and hunt duskies. They're wonderful. They're people call them fool's hens in many places, and I know elk hunters in Colorado that whomp them with a stick and all that. But boy, I love them. They're a bigger bird. They're exciting when they get up. They hold pretty well for a dog. And the nice thing is, you get any bird on the ground and holding in front of a dog, and then you walk it up, they're going to fly. They're generally going to fly. You know what I mean? And they grab the gradient, and it's a little more open. And it's just it's an entirely different hunt. For folks who have never hunted duskies before, blue grouse before, it's actually kind of a novelty because first they're hunting forest grouse, but it is a little more open. And they're often surprised at how much bigger a bird, the bird is. It's 30-40% bigger than a ruffie, as you well know.
Wow. Yeah.
30%.
So you use the term parky, which, by the way, I'm going to steal and use in a story somewhere.
Sure.
Describe that kind of habitat for us. Where are we going to find those duskies? Yeah.
So they like the rest of forest grouse, they like edges also. Only in the case of duskies, they're going to want to be up at elevation. We talked about that, number one. And then number two, they're generally speaking, in my country anyway, they're going to be in and around older Doug fir. And the older Doug fir ridges up here in my country anyway are usually, you could call them elky or parky. They're going to be sort of open, what would constitute the only open country in my area, right? Most of it's pretty heavily forested, but up on the ridge tops, more traditional park-like areas, smaller, long ridge tops of a half a mile or so, maybe even a little bit longer, that have broken 1 to half acre parky area, grassy parky areas with an edge of big tall Doug fir and maybe some brush. You know what I mean? But in many areas, Scott, they'd call it elk. Good elk habitat, elky country.
Less cluttered.
That's right. Exactly. Yep.
Like you said, some grass, some more open ground. But certainly some brush. Are they eating the same things, or up there?
They typically are. Yeah, I would say it was sort of. So they will definitely be on huckleberries. They will definitely be in the fall. They will definitely be on all sorts of berries when they can. But the other thing, spruce grouse and duskies can also make a living on needles.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes you'll find spruce grouse down lower. They'll have a few berries and also some needles, spruce needles in particular. And in the case of duskies in my country, Doug fir needles. That's why they're always around, it's sitting and roosting in big Doug firs and down below Doug firs, and hoppers, any game bird will eat insects for sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I've found them on some years just crops loaded with hoppers, and early in the season you get a warm September day, something like that. But but by and large, the biggest difference is ruffies and duskies and sprucers can make a living on needles, and oftentimes the crop will be full of needles and a little bit of greenery and a berry. Yeah,
was doing some research on them for a winter story, and the biologists say that their gut biome, the bacteria in their gut changes so that they can actually get nutrition out of those needles.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Yeah. They're interesting too because they're also a reverse migrator, for lack of a better word. They're down lower in the springtime to have chicks, and then they migrate to elevation. They'll be at highest elevation during the wintertime.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Making a living up here in my country, 6,000 feet and 27 feet of snow, and but they burrow, right?
Yeah.
Like all grouse, they'll burrow in the snow, and it's pretty warm and cozy, as I understand.
Let's hope you don't have to build your own snow cave someday.
Right. I'd rather not. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about safety and holding the line and that sort of thing. Describe some of the things that you will ask us to do when we do get a dog that's on point and reachable. What's the drill from there? Are you gonna stage manage that, whether you did it in advance or you're going to do it at the moment you hear the beeper go off? How are you going to get your hunters into the spot, and what are they going to do?
Yeah, great question. Right, great question. So the as I said, I and most of the guys that are guiding forest grouse, you're definitely busy since you can't see each other. You're definitely busy. You're making sure you know where everybody is at every minute, every stage of the cover, every stage of the hunt. When the beeper goes off, or when a dog goes on point, generally, depending on who's closer, Scott, depending on who's closest, I will always, they'll usually get the point, so to speak. It's a little much, let's say you got the guy on the other side, and he could be 40 yards out, you know what I mean? And now, if the dog holds, I might say, you might try and get over here. Hey, Joe, you might try and get over here. We got a point. But oftentimes what I'll do is, throughout the course of the day, both sides are always going to get a shot or three, you know what I mean? And so oftentimes the gun that's closest, I will generally just make a beeline for the dog, and then all the while I'm sort of, over here. Yep, keep coming right, keep coming. Here I am. See me first. I make sure they see me.
Yeah.
The second thing I will do is say, Joe's 30 yards to my right, so nothing on the right side. You know what I mean, right? No matter where this bird goes, nothing on the right side. And then with forest grouse, I'll tell the guns to be maybe a little more aggressive. And I don't mean aggressive in a in an unsafe way or running. No running with guns ever, right? Never,
right.
Scott. But by aggressive I mean the trick is, particularly with ruffies, the gun wants to put that bird up. You know what I mean? You want to get to that dog, and you want to get there because those ruffies are wiggling out in front, and they're going to just walk, kind of wiggle away, and you might get ghosted, or they might just walk away too far for a shot by the time they get up. So I tell people, dog goes on point. Let's get there as quickly and safely as we can, and then you want to be the one to put that bird up. You want to go right around the dog, left side or right side, depending on if you can, see which way his nose is facing, and try and flush that bird yourself, and so, or birds, plural. But it's interesting like that, because you don't, the quicker, again, safety is first, but the quicker you can get to a pointing dog on forest grouse, the much better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and then, like you said, just to be clear, move right in on that bird. I've got a theory that a bird that hears a human that is walking with alacrity, that is asserting himself in the field, the bird is a little bit more cooperative.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
It just, whether it's fear or whatever, they behave better for a hunter that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I'm going to use those words. Yeah, that's perfect, Scott.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk about, without naming names, because they might have to kill you afterwards. But you hunt with a lot of people from a lot of places, and once or more this season, somebody in your charge has made you smile for something they did while on a hunt with you. Can you remember anything in particular that just made your day?
Yeah, I sure can. Usually this is going to sound, again, stating the obvious, but a good shot on a roughie is pretty amazing. You know what I mean? I mean, it truly is. It truly is amazing. It's so thick. They're so fast. In this particular case, the dog went on point in front of me. Hunter's 30 yards to my right. And this happens once, maybe twice during the year, where I'll flush the bird almost, or a bird gets up at my approach. Dog hard stop, right? Dog's out in front of me by 20 yards and hard stop, and I don't have time to say, hey Joe, come on over this way. Dog's on point. We got a point here. That bird is just jumpy, and that bird just gets up. And this year, in particular, I had a hunter make one of the nicest shots I've seen. Bird got up in front of me. Dog goes on point, hard stop, but the bird was jumpy. It was a nice big drummer, big bird. And I take two steps just to getting ready to say, hey Joe, over here, I've got a point. Oftentimes I'll just kind of swing away from the dog for a minute just to make sure the dog is steady and on point. And sometimes they'll flash point, as you well know, and there's old sign, or sometimes we don't know what they're pointing. But anyway, bird flushes to my right, and I barely had time to holler bird up, and the gentleman and the gun on my right, I heard the gun on the right hand side snap, and I thought, wow, I can't. I'd be shocked if first I was surprised he got a shot. Second, he said, I heard him say, I think I hit that bird. And sure enough, brought the dog over, hunt dead, and 30 yards out, that bird was stone dead with a headshot, and that to me was very, very impressive, because it was a really, really difficult shot. You know what I mean? It was fast, and that bird was already going. This guy is a good shot, but I just thought, wow, that's as nice a shot as I'll see all season. And shot. So I would say that when someone knocks a roughie down like that, that's a pretty special thing. Going away is a little bit easier. You do get some going away shots. if a bird gets up and tries to get up to the story, get up higher, that's there's no such thing as an easy shot at a forest grouse, but a crossing bird in traditional, forest grouse cover is a very, very difficult shot to make, and that was super fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've heard. I've never accomplished that, but
well, I don't either. I haven't either.
But I had much the same experience in the Chucker Hills. The first 2 birds I shot this season on opening day were snapshots like that.
Yeah.
So you don't have time to overthink it. I think that's part of it.
I know it. Right.
Especially in the grouse woods.
Yep.
They got up before I was ready for them to get up, and then I hear from behind me, "Did you shoot too?" And he meant,
right.
"Did you shoot also?" And I look at Dave both times, and he's opening his gun and taking out empty shells. So the first 2 birds that I shot this season, he shot too.
I'll be darned. Yeah, what a riot. Yeah,
so
yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's interesting sometimes too, because I think that to your point, I'm a terrible shot. I don't practice. I don't shoot. The only time I shoot a shotgun is when I maybe get a chance to go off on my own, which isn't very often.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, the interesting thing sometimes is to your point, I've also had hunters say the same thing, that the best thing that happened there was I didn't get to think about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Scott? It was instinctual, and it was shoot the shadow, and everything was safe, and just bird up, got out in front of it. They can't fly through trees, so in forest grouse, you try and find those little slots and shoot that shadow, get ahead of that shadow. And, sometimes if you don't think of it, hunters do a little bit better sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could go on and trade stories all day, but I'm going to turn you loose to get ready for your next season, whatever it is.
Thank you, Scott.
That's Tim Linehan, Linehan Outfitters. Fishmontana.com is where you learn more about his entire operation. Beautiful country up there. I only wish I could get there a little bit more frequently. I've got Neil Higgins' question about steadiness, and it will be related to what we've talked about just a little, Tim. But you are dismissed for the day. Enjoy the rest of it. I am so glad that we finally got connected. Have a great winter, such as it is. Stay warm. Don't get lost. And thanks for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast.
Always a pleasure, Scott. Thank you so much. And stay in touch, and let's hunt together sometime soon.
I almost crashed your party this fall, so watch out. Thank you, Tim.
Anytime. And thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. Oh, yeah, we got so much more to talk about. And yes, I cannot wait to get up in that country. It's beautiful. It is so different than most of what we get to see out there. So watch out, Tim. Watch out, everybody in Yak. I'll give you plenty of notice. That part of the show brought to you by TrulockChokes.com. Hey, maybe you're going to go out and do some forest grouse hunting. If you are, then you want to open up your chokes a little bit. Yeah, maybe cylinder and cylinder. Well, they've got your choke tubes right there. 2,000 to choose from no matter what you're hunting for. Hey, if you're a waterfowler or a turkey hunter, they've got something for you as well. You learned from Scott a few episodes back on the new stuff they've got in the waterfowl and upland world. Take a good long look at TrulockChokes.com, TruLock, TrulockChokes.com. And I keep raving about Flick's condition. Yeah, he lost 3 pounds on opening weekend, which was 4 days long for us. But back in condition, and one of the reasons is the ingredients in Pro Plan Sport dog food from Purina. You want to learn about all their formulations, go to ProPlansport.com. No matter what life stage your dog is at or what activity level, they've got a formulation for you at ProPlansport.com, all built around protein at 30% and fat at 20% to fuel metabolic needs and maintain lean muscle mass. Learn more at ProPlansport.com. newness.com. Well, fascinating question from Neil Higgins in Minnesota for our Handle It segment this week, related to something that Tim talked about during our discussion earlier in the podcast, and some more thoughts that I will pass on as well. Neil's got a 21-month-old Griffon doing well, steady to release 90% of the time on a training field. But in North Dakota, on Sharpies, creep in a little bit here and there. And as a result, Neil says he passed up 3 easy shots because he said, I didn't want to reward the creep. So a good question for you. Exactly how strict are most of the people you work with? If she holds for 5 or 10 seconds, is that okay? Well, great question, Neil. And the answer is, depends. You know, you just heard Tim Linehan describe his young dog learning how to, what did he call it, reposition on birds that are waddling away. Now, granted, ruffies may not move at the speed of light, but they still move, and that's the point. I've had that happen with chuckers and had an incredible learning experience watching somebody else's drahtar do that on Huns in South Dakota. So moving birds are hey, they're part of the game. We're going to have to put up with that. So what should a dog do? Now, that's not to say that's the only reason a dog creeps. If a dog creeps because he or she thinks he's going to put the bird in the air or catch it on the ground, yeah, you got to work on that. But if a dog is moving, whether you call it a creep or a reposition or anything else, hey, the Épagnols Breton guys have a name for that. They call it couler, and it's a command. Go ahead and move up and relocate on that bird. So, yes, train for steadiness. Train so the dog understands the difference, understands they'll never catch a bird on the ground. But then maybe there is a command you can use for those times. I had one on Flick in eastern Montana earlier this year. The wind was blowing so hard, the scent was coming from 400 yards away. So, you know, he'd stop, he'd put his head higher, and then he'd move a little one way or the other or forward or all that. You got to understand why the dog is doing what he's doing, Neil. And then maybe you can, develop a training strategy that includes a term, a command for that, and then also enforces obedience when you know for a fact that the dog really isn't trying to help you, it's trying to catch that bird on the ground. Drill, drill, drill. Good luck on that. Hope you have a great season. Thanks for the question. Neil Higgins from Minnesota. And the Handle It segment this week brought to you by Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. They're hunters. They know what works on the range or in the field, and they are the place to go when you start your search for a new shotgun. Dave Fiedler is the guru when it comes to that stuff. Start by calling him at midvalleyclays.com. Get in touch. Tell him what you're looking for. Tell him why you're looking for it. He'll ask you a few questions, and you never know what you might end up with based on the knowledge that he brings to the table and possibly a way to help you that you hadn't thought of yourself. Once you're ready to pull the trigger, so to speak, he can ship anywhere, anytime. They've got all the gauges, all the styles, and the leading brands at midvalleyclays.com. Well, thank you, Tim Linehan. Always great to talk with you, and hope to be there maybe next fall. If you want to learn more about Tim and his operation, go to fishmontana.com. And then please tell one person about the Upland Nation podcast. That's how we're growing, and we're growing real fast, 21% in the last 3 months in terms of downloads, and it's all because you are spreading the word. Tell all your friends who want to learn more about bird hunting, bird dog training, and all the wonderful things that happen when we do those. And some of them will come over and listen as well. We're made possible by Sage and Breaker Gun Care products, Purina Pro Plan Sport dog food, MidvalleyClays.com, TrulockChokes.com, MidwayUSA.com, PointerShotguns.com, and HiViz Shooting Systems. Always something new at FindBirdHuntingSpots.com. I'll bring you an update real soon on our Fur Feathers Friends event there, so stand by. And until then, and until we speak again, enjoy your time in the field with your dog and your friends. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks for listening to the Upland Nation podcast.